My name is Valentina Cruz. I am 29 years old, and I used to believe that if you worked hard enough and loved your family enough, they would eventually see you clearly. I was wrong. I graduated third in my class from the architecture program at the University of Oregon. That fact still lives in my chest the way a healed fracture lives in bone. You don't feel it until the weather changes. I had spent 5 years doing the work. Drafting until 2 in the morning, surviving studio critiques that ran 4 hours past schedule, rebuilding entire project models the night before final reviews because my proportions were off by a ratio I couldn't live with. I wasn't the most naturally gifted student in my cohort. But I was meticulous. My professors used that word often enough that I started to believe it was the truest thing anyone had ever said about me. My thesis project was a mixed-use community center for a mid-sized coastal town, adaptive reuse of a decommissioned cannery building. My faculty advisor, Dr. Renata Solis, told me it was the strongest adaptive reuse thesis she had reviewed in 11 years of teaching. I kept her written evaluation in the front pocket of my portfolio case for 3 years after graduation. I still have it. I come from a family that built things. My grandfather, Ernesto Cruz, started a regional construction firm in the late 1970s with a borrowed transit level and a reputation for finishing on time. Cruz family construction had completed projects across 4 counties: schools, municipal buildings, mid-rise residential complexes in Portland. My father, Roberto Cruz, took over operations when my grandfather died 14 years ago. My Aunt Pilar managed the office. I was the oldest grandchild. I was the one who went into architecture. What I did not understand was that my father had already decided what my degree was for. Not for me. For the firm. I want to stop here for a moment because I think some of you watching this know exactly what I mean when I say that a parent can look at your accomplishments and see only what use they are to them. If that's you, if you've sat at a table and watched someone take credit for something you built, or felt the particular exhaustion of being useful but never valued, I want you to stay with me. Because what happened next took 2.5 years to reach its end, and it is worth understanding in full. I moved back to Portland 6 weeks after graduation. I had 2 interviews already scheduled and the specific, quiet confidence of someone who has done the work and knows it. I sat across the table from my father the first evening I was home. He asked me about my plans. I told him about the interviews. He nodded slowly, the way he did when he was preparing a response that would arrive slightly sideways. You know, he said, the firm could use someone with your training. I told him I wanted to pursue licensure through an established practice first. Get my hours logged. Build a client-facing portfolio under real project conditions. He nodded again. Of course, he said. Of course. Pursue your interviews. He poured himself another glass of water and said nothing else. I did not know, sitting across that table, that the conversation was already over. The first interview was on a Tuesday morning in late June. The firm was called Harlow Aldridge Associates, 12 architects, a good reputation for school and library work. I had researched their last 8 projects. I arrived 7 minutes early and sat in one of the chairs along the window, watching a woman mark up a set of elevations with a red pen, and I felt the particular anticipation of someone who belongs in a room and knows it. The associate principal, Gary Fitch, came out and shook my hand. He looked at me for a beat longer than felt natural. We sat. He opened my portfolio. He turned the first 3 pages with a careful neutrality. Then he closed it. I'll be honest with you, he said. We had a conversation last week that gives me some concern. I asked him what conversation. He looked at the table. We received a call. From someone representing your family's firm. They indicated there had been some issues around project funds. Missing materials charges. My hands were in my lap. I pressed my left thumb into my right palm and held it there. That's not accurate, I said. I'm not saying it is, Gary Fitch said. He said it the way people say things when they have already made up their mind. I'm saying it puts us in a difficult position. We're a small office. We can't absorb reputational risk at the hiring stage. The interview lasted 19 minutes. I stood on the sidewalk outside in the June heat and did not move for a long moment. A bus went past. A woman with a stroller crossed against the light. I told myself it was one conversation. I went home and confirmed my interview for Thursday. Thursday's interview lasted 11 minutes. The interviewer did not open my portfolio at all. Over the following 6 weeks, I sent applications to 14 firms. 4 callbacks. All 4 followed the same pattern: a first meeting that ended early, a vague explanation involving direction changes or hiring freezes. One interviewer actually said the words "we heard something" before catching himself and steering back to the hiring freeze explanation. I drove home from that last interview and sat in the car in the parking structure for 22 minutes. My pulse was slow and heavy in my throat. I ran through every project I had worked on, every person who might have cause to say something about me. The list was short. My professional life was essentially clean. The list kept coming back to one place. I did not want to believe it. It was not that I lacked evidence. It was that the evidence required me to believe something about my father that I had spent my entire life refusing to believe. That he looked at me and saw a threat to be managed rather than a daughter to be supported. I drove to my parents' house that evening and knocked on his office door. "Come in," he said. I stood in the doorway. "Dad, I need to ask you something directly." He looked up from the papers on his desk. His expression was patient and slightly inconvenienced. "Someone has been calling the firms I'm interviewing with," I said. "Saying things about me. About money. Missing charges." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Val, the architecture market in Portland is tight right now. It's not personal, firms are risk-averse." "That's not what I asked." "I think," he said, "that you should consider whether your energy is going in the right direction. The firm has real work. You could log your hours there, get your licensure, and not spend your time chasing offices that aren't going to work out." I squared the edge of the doorframe with my hand and said nothing for a moment. "Did you call them?" I said. "I think this conversation is getting away from you a little," he said. "You're tired. You've had a frustrating few weeks." "That's understandable." He turned back to his papers. I stood in the doorway for 3 more seconds. Then I left. I drove home, sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch, and let myself understand what I was dealing with. He had done it. I knew it the way you know a structural failure in a building, not from the moment of collapse but from the pattern of stress that preceded it. And he would keep doing it because it was working and because he had decided that my architecture degree belonged to Cruz Family Construction the moment I walked across that stage. I was 23 years old. I had nowhere to go professionally in my own city. And I did not yet know about the envelope. What I am about to tell you requires going back further. Back to before the interviews, before graduation, before Oregon, to the specific texture of growing up as Roberto Cruz's oldest daughter in a family where contribution was expected and acknowledged only when it served his purposes. I was 11 years old the first time I understood that my father counted things differently for me than for my brother, Mateo. That summer, my father took Mateo, who was 8, to a job site for the first time. He put a hard hat on him and walked him around a concrete pour and bought him lunch at the diner 2 blocks from the site. He talked about it at dinner for a week. I asked my father if I could come to a job site. He said, "Job sites aren't really for girls, Mija. You'd be bored." I filed it away. I went back to drawing floor plans in my notebooks. I had been doing that since I was 9, filling graph paper notebooks with room layouts and building sections I pulled from library books. I became more precise. By the time I was 15, I was spending Saturday mornings in the firm's office. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I wanted to understand how a construction business actually ran. I reorganized the filing system for completed projects, 3 years of closed files, reindexed by project type and county, cross-referenced with the subcontractor ledgers. It took me 4 Saturdays. My father told me I had done a nice job. Then he assigned the ongoing maintenance to an office manager they hired 6 months later and never mentioned it again. At 16, over spring break, I cataloged the county permit database for every Cruz family construction project completed between 1987 and 2004, 17 years of records, organized into a reference binder the firm used for their bonding applications for the next 4 years. The bonding agent told my father the documentation was the cleanest he had seen from a regional firm in years. My father thanked him and bought the table lunch. He did not mention my name. In my first year at Oregon, he called me on a Sunday evening with a compliance problem, a temporary site office structure that wasn't meeting county accessibility requirements, with an inspector coming in 10 days. I drew 3 layout options, emailed them with notes, and we were on the phone for an hour walking through the implications. He submitted the revised layout to the county. The inspector signed off. He told the project superintendent a consultant had handled it. In my second year, I drafted the preliminary schematic drawings for the Tillamook Medical Clinic addition, 40 hours across 2 weekends, while carrying 19 credits and working part-time in the university's facilities department. The drawings gave the firm a basis to bid the project. They won the bid. The project was worth $2.3 million in construction value. My father paid me nothing because I was family and family helped. He told the client the drawings came from a Portland-based design consultant the firm had retained. I want to be precise about the inventory because precision is the thing my father always underestimated about me. I reorganized the files at 15. I cataloged 17 years of permit records at 16. I solved the Clatsop County compliance problem at 19. I produced the Tillamook schematic drawings at 20. I reviewed and corrected the structural coordination notes on 2 residential projects in my 4th year, sent back with a clear note explaining what I had found. He forwarded them to the structural engineer without comment. Every one of those contributions went into the firm without my name attached. Every one served Roberto Cruz's reputation. None of them appeared in any conversation about what I had done or what I might be capable of. My grandmother Esperanza Cruz died when I was 21. In my 3rd year at Oregon. She died in March during midterms, and I flew home for the service and flew back 3 days later because I had a structural systems review I could not miss. What I did not know then, what I would not know for 6 more years, was that my grandmother had done something the previous autumn. That she had sat with a woman she trusted, and that a sealed envelope had been prepared and placed somewhere safe, with instructions about when it should reach me. I did not know any of that yet. What I knew, in the months after I moved back to Portland, was that I needed to survive in a city where my father had apparently decided to make my name synonymous with financial misconduct. I applied to firms in Salem. In Eugene. 2 of those interviews ended the same way the Portland ones had. He had made calls outside the city. I stopped applying to architecture firms in Oregon entirely. I took a job waiting tables at a restaurant called Meridian on the east side of Portland. I was good at it, meticulous, fast, able to hold a great deal in my head without losing any of it. The floor manager told me after my 3rd week that I was the most organized server she had ever trained. I thanked her and went home and sat with the particular grief of someone who was being recognized for the wrong thing. I waited tables for 2 years and 4 months. I kept my Oregon architectural license application materials current. I did small residential consultation work under a friend's LLC. Feasibility studies and preliminary layouts for homeowners who couldn't afford full services. I charged $200 a study. I kept records of every one. My father called me twice during those years. The second call ended with him saying, "You know you'll end up coming back to serve the family eventually, Val. There's no shame in it." I set my phone down on the kitchen counter. I did not respond. I stood there for a moment looking at the window above the sink, at the particular gray-white of a Portland October sky, and I let the weight of what he had just said settle into me, and then I let it harden into something useful. And somewhere I did not yet know about, an envelope with my name on it had been sitting sealed in a drawer for 5 years. The interview request came on a Wednesday morning in February, 2.5 years after I had moved back to Portland. The email was from Halcyon Architecture Plus Development, a firm I recognized immediately. 14, maybe 16 people, but a specific reputation for institutional and civic work I had followed since my thesis year. Their most recent project, a branch library renovation in Clark County, had been published in 2 regional journals. I had read both pieces. The email said they had received my portfolio through a referral from a faculty contact at the University of Oregon and would like to schedule an introductory conversation. I read it 3 times. Then I sat with it for 40 minutes before I trusted myself to write a reply that didn't sound like what I actually felt, which was a careful, wire-taut hope I could not afford to let run ahead of the evidence. I confirmed the interview for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. I spent the next 8 days rebuilding my portfolio presentation, not the work itself, which was good, but the sequencing, the framing. I researched every published project Halcyon had completed in the last 6 years. I pulled their planning commission submissions from 3 county databases. I did not tell anyone in my family. I had learned by then that information shared with my family did not stay where you put it. The Thursday before my interview, I was finishing a closing shift at Meridian when my phone lit up on the service stand. My mother. I called her back standing in the alley with my apron still on. "Your father wants to have dinner Sunday," she said. "He said he heard you might be looking for work again." My chest went very still. I pressed my back against the wall and looked at the strip of sky above the alley. "Where did he hear that?" I said. "I don't know, Mija. You know how he is." I told her I would come. On Sunday, I drove to my parents' house. My brother Mateo was there, which I had not expected. My Aunt Pilar was there as well. The table was set for a real dinner. We ate. My father talked about a county contract the firm was bidding. Mateo talked about a site coordination problem he had solved. I ate and listened and watched my father not look at me directly. After dinner, my father folded his hands on the table. "So," he said, "I hear you're thinking about getting back into architecture." "I've been keeping my application materials current," I said. "Portland's a small market," he said. "You know that. Firms talk." I capped the pen I had been holding. I had taken notes during the contract discussion out of habit, and set it down on the table and said nothing. "I've been thinking," my father said, "that it might be time for the firm to bring on someone with a real design background. For the larger bids. Someone who understands both the construction side and the architectural side. A management track position. Your name on the firm's materials." Mateo was looking at his water glass. There it was. My name on the firm's materials. After 2.5 years of no name on anything. "I have an interview next week," I said. Something shifted in my father's expression. Very small, but I had been reading that face for 29 years. "With whom?" he said. "An architecture firm," I said. "Val." His voice took on the patient register. "We both know how these conversations have been going. I'm offering you something real. Something with security. The market isn't going to get easier." "I appreciate the offer," I said. "I'll think about it." I drove home. My pulse was running faster than my expression showed, the kind of internal acceleration that happens when you understand that a clock you didn't know was running has just started to move more quickly. He knew about the interview. He knew, or he suspected, and this dinner had been a preemptive move. Come back before you try something that won't work out. On Monday evening, my phone rang. A Portland area code I didn't recognize. "Ms. Cruz? This is Patricia Voss from Halcyon Architecture. I'm calling to confirm your appointment for Thursday." "Yes," I said. "Thursday at 2. I'll be there." "Wonderful. I also want to let you know, I received a phone call today from someone who identified himself as a representative of Cruz Family Construction. He indicated there had been some financial irregularities associated with your name." The floor of my chest went cold. "I want to be transparent with you," Patricia Voss said. "We looked into the claim. We were not able to find any documentation supporting it. The call itself raised some concerns for me about its purpose. I'd still like to meet with you Thursday. But I thought you should know." I thanked her. I said I would explain when we met. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter very carefully. He had called Halcyon. 2.5 years later, with a different firm, he had made the same call he had been making since the week I moved back to Portland. I went to the drawer beside my sink. I took out a notepad. I wrote down everything Patricia Voss had said verbatim in the order she said it. Date, time, what I had been told. I had learned by then to keep records of everything. Then my phone rang again. Pilar's voice, lower than usual. Val. Call me when you can. Not on the house phone. It's about your grandmother. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment. Outside the window, the February dark had settled fully over the street. A car went past. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and stopped. My grandmother had been dead for 6 years. I called Pilar back. Pilar told me everything in 20 minutes, standing in the parking lot of a grocery store 2 miles from my parents' house. My grandmother Esperanza had gone to a lawyer in the autumn of the year before she died. Not the firm's lawyer, a woman named Deborah Stein who had an office on the west side of Portland. My grandmother had told no one she was going. She had taken the bus. She had brought a folder of documents she had been assembling quietly for several months, and at the end of 2 hours an envelope had been prepared and notarized and sealed, with a cover letter specifying that it was to be given to Valentina Cruz, me specifically by name, in the event that I ever faced a professional or financial difficulty that appeared to originate from within the family. The envelope had been with Deborah Stein's office for 6 years. He read from a list, Pilar said. Her voice was flat and tired. He had notes. He said there had been missing materials charges on 2 projects and that you had been quietly let go from a previous position. Val, you have never held a position to be let go from. He made it up. All of it. I stood in the parking lot and let the cold February air settle around me. I was furious, a cold, clean fury that had nowhere useful to go yet, so I set it aside and focused on what came next. Call Deborah Stein, Pilar said. Monday morning. Tell her who you are. She'll know. I called Deborah Stein at 8:02 Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting across from her in her office with the envelope open on the desk between us. My grandmother had been meticulous in a way I recognized because it was the same quality I had always believed I inherited from her. The envelope contained 3 things: a handwritten letter, 2 pages, in my grandmother's careful script, a notarized statement attesting to the contents and her intentions, and a folded document, a deed of trust executed 15 years ago, transferring a parcel of land in Yamhill County to a holding entity whose sole named beneficiary was me. The parcel was 12 acres. Agricultural land, partially wooded, with a converted barn that had been leased to a small organic operation for the past 11 years. The lease payments had been accumulating in a trust account since my grandmother's death, managed by Deborah Stein's office per the instructions. The current account balance was $214,000. The land itself had been appraised 18 months ago at $1.7 million. I asked Deborah Stein one question before I left. Had my father ever contacted her office? She looked at me steadily. 3 times, she said. Over the past 4 years. We don't discuss client matters with third parties. I thanked her. I took the envelope. I went home and confirmed with Patricia Voss that I would be there Thursday at 2 and that I had documentation I would like to bring. The Halcyon Architecture office was on the 4th floor of a building near the Pearl District. Drafting tables, exposed structure, the serious quiet of people doing real work. Patricia Voss met me in the lobby. She was in her mid-40s, precise in the way good architects are precise, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair. The CEO, a man named David Okafor, was already seated in the conference room. He was older than I expected, mid-60s, the kind of calm that takes decades to build. He studied me for a long moment when I came in. Ms. Cruz, he said. Sit down. I sat. I set my portfolio on the table. I set Deborah Stein's envelope beside it, and beside that, a printed copy of the notarized deed of trust. You mentioned you had documentation, Patricia Voss said. I do, I said. I took out the deed of trust and placed it on the table between us. Then the trust account statement, $214,000, current as of last week. Then I opened my portfolio to the section containing the feasibility studies I had completed over the past 2 years, each one dated, each one with the client's name and a brief project description. 14 studies. $200 each. Every record clean. David Okafor looked at the documents without touching them. Patricia Voss picked up the deed of trust and read the first page. The calls you received about me, I said, came from my father. Roberto Cruz, Cruz Family Construction. I can tell you exactly when he started making them. June 2 years ago, the week after I moved back to Portland following graduation. He called at least 6 firms here, 2 in Salem, 1 in Eugene. He told them I had been involved in missing materials charges. That is not true. I have never held a salaried position in my life. There is nothing to have been charged with. Patricia Voss set the deed down. Why would he do that? Because I have a degree his firm needs and he wanted me to have no other option, I said. He told me 6 weeks ago that I would end up coming back to serve the family eventually. He believed that was true because he had been making it true for 2.5 years. David Okafor had not looked away from me. He said, the land in Yamhill County. My grandmother's, I said. She set it aside for me 15 years ago. She notarized the intent. Her condition was that it should reach me if I faced professional difficulty that came from inside the family. I paused. She knew him. There was a silence in the room. Outside the conference room windows, Portland was doing what Portland does in February. Low gray light, the particular patience of a city that has accepted the rain. David Okafor said, walk me through the Tillamook project. The schematic drawings you mentioned in your portfolio notes. And I did. I walked him through the Tillamook Medical Clinic edition. The 40 hours, the 2 weekends, the 19 credits I was carrying, the bid the firm won, the $2.3 million construction value. I walked him through the Clatsop County compliance drawings. I walked him through the permit database I had cataloged at 16. I was precise and unhurried, and I did not apologize for any of it. At the end, David Okafor looked at Patricia Voss. She looked back at him. We'd like to see the full portfolio, he said. And I'd like to schedule a second conversation next week with our project director. I nodded. I squared the documents in front of me before I answered. I'll be available, I said. My father called me 4 days after the Halcyon interview. I did not answer. He called again the following morning. I let that one go to voicemail as well. His message was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. He said he had heard I had been in contact with an attorney regarding family property matters. He said that whatever Pilar had told me, there was a broader context. That everything he had done had been for the good of the family, and that I was young and did not yet fully understand how things worked in business. I did not call him back. Instead, I drove to his office on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the Halcyon interview, after Deborah Stein had sent a formal letter to my father's personal attorney notifying him of the trust's existence and my status as sole beneficiary. I drove to the Cruz Family Construction office on the industrial side of Northeast Portland, the building I had been in hundreds of times, with the permit boards on the wall and the site photos going back to my grandfather's era. My Aunt Pilar was at the front desk. She stood up without being asked and went to the back room. Mateo's office door was open. He saw me come in and looked at his desk. My father was at his own desk when I knocked on the open door. Val, he said. Good. Sit down, let's talk. I sat down across from him. I did not take anything out of my bag. I looked at him and let the quiet sit between us for a moment. You told Gary Fitch at Harlow Aldridge that I had been involved in missing materials charges, I said. That was June 2 years ago. You said it the week after I moved back to Portland. You told me the market was tight and that firms were risk-averse. He opened his mouth. You told Dana Park at the firm on Burnside the same thing, I said. You said it to 2 firms in Salem and 1 in Eugene. When I got a call back from Halcyon Architecture last month, you called Patricia Voss before my interview date and read from a list. The list included a previous position I had been quietly let go from. I have never held a salaried position. You invented that. He said, Val, there's a context here. You told me when I was 11 that job sites weren't really for girls, I said. I went home and kept drawing floor plans. You told me the filing system reorganization was nice work and hired someone else to maintain it. I cataloged 17 years of permit records at 16 so your bonding application would go through clean. The bonding agent told you it was the best documentation he had seen from a regional firm. You bought the table lunch. He said, that's not. You told a client the Tillamook schematic drawings came from a Portland design consultant. I drew those in 2 weekends in my second year, carrying 19 credits while working part-time. Your firm won a $2.3 million bid on those drawings. I let that number sit. You told me 6 weeks ago that I would end up coming back to serve the family eventually. You said there was no shame in it. He was very still. What I was actually doing, I said, during the 2.5 years you were calling firms with my name in your mouth, was keeping records. Every interview. Every early ending. Every vague explanation. Every firm. I have dates, names, and notes from a phone call I received from Patricia Voss, the day after you called her, in which she told me exactly what you had said. I paused. Deborah Stein's office has copies of everything. My attorney has copies of everything. You have received her letter. He looked at me for a long time. The practiced reasonableness, I watched it work through its options and find none of them useful. You're going to burn this family down, he said, over a grudge. No, I said. I picked up my bag. I'm going to go to work. I stood. I walked out of his office, through the front room where Pilar was standing in the doorway holding a coffee cup she hadn't delivered to anyone. I looked at her. She nodded once. I walked out of the building. Mateo called me that evening. He was quiet on the phone before he said, I didn't know he was calling firms. I want you to know that. I believe you, I said. What are you going to do? I'm going to work, I said again. Pilar texted me the following morning. 2 words, he knows. The letter from Deborah Stein's office had been specific about the trust's value and what remedies were available if the defamation campaign could be documented. My father was a man who understood numbers and what they implied. I did not hear from him again for a long time. Halcyon Architecture offered me a junior associate position 6 weeks after that first interview. The salary was fair. The work was real, a branch library expansion in Washington County and a feasibility study for a community health clinic in East Portland, exactly the kind of civic institutional work I had wanted since my thesis year. David Okafor told me at the offer meeting that he had called Dr. Renata Solis at the University of Oregon to verify my background. He said she had used the word meticulous. I started in April. On my first day, I brought my portfolio case with Dr. Solis's written evaluation in the front pocket, the same place it had been since graduation. I did not take it out. I just knew it was there. The Yamhill County land is still leased to the organic operation. The lease payments still go into the trust account. I have not decided what to do with the land itself, whether to sell it or hold it or eventually build something on it. Deborah Stein tells me there is no urgency. My grandmother understood that some things should be allowed to wait until the right moment. I think about Esperanza Cruz often. I think about what it took to do what she did, to see her son clearly, to love him anyway, and to quietly prepare against the possibility of him. To take a bus across Portland to a lawyer's office and sit for 2 hours and leave an envelope for a granddaughter who did not yet know she would need it. That is an enormous thing, done without drama, without announcement, without any expectation of being thanked for it. She was gone before I could tell her that I understood. The things you build in private, in the years when no one is watching or crediting you, they do not disappear. They accumulate. A filing system reorganized at 15. A permit catalog at 16. 40 hours of schematic drawings in a second-year weekend. $200 at a time, 14 feasibility studies, every record dated and clean. What looks like waiting is sometimes preparation. What looks like service is sometimes proof. I am 29 years old. I have a job I earned, a license I am working toward, and a sealed envelope that a woman who loved me prepared before I knew I would need it. That is enough. That is more than enough. If any part of this story sat with you, if you recognize something in it, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. These stories find the people they're meant to find. The events in this story are fictional and created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is coincidental.